Hello and welcome. This is a lecture series. Please have paper and pencils ready to take notes. The better your notes, the more help they will be later when you are performing assignments. Today we are discussing the Oklahoma Academic Standard 8.5.R.2. This is 8th grade, standard number 5 for reading point 2. The standard reads, students will recognize the use of active and passive voice. Please pause the video and write down what standard 8.5.R.2 is about. So what is voice? Voice is the form a verb takes to indicate whether that subject of the verb performs or receives the action. And there are two types of voice that we are going to discuss today, and one is an active voice and one is a passive voice. Please pause the video and write down the definition of what voice is. Let's first look at active voice. An active voice is used to show that the subject of the sentence is performing or causing the action, and it's what we use in everyday speech. I have some examples here. Ben Roethlisberger threw the football from the 40-yard line. How about Ben picked up the football and ran? So in both of these examples, I'm telling you that the subject of the sentence, Ben Roethlisberger, is performing the action. Who threw the football? Ben did. Who picked up the football? Ben did. This is an active voice. This is how we speak every day whenever we're speaking to one another. Please pause the video and write down the definition of active voice. I encourage you to write down the examples as well. Now let's discuss passive voice. Passive voice is used when the subject receives the action of the verb by the object, and it's used less often, especially in our daily speech. For example, the football was thrown by Ben Roethlisberger, or the touchdown was made by Antonio Brown. That sounds a little bit weird, doesn't it? It's correct grammatically, but it's not the way we normally talk. So let's look at this here. Who is the subject of the first example? The football. What was the verb? What was happening to the subject? It was being thrown. What's the object? Ben Roethlisberger. So who threw the football? Ben Roethlisberger. The football was thrown. But this isn't the way we normally speak, and so passive voice feels a little bit different. Please pause the video and write down the definition of passive voice and the examples. So why does it matter whether we recognize active and passive voice or whether we write active and passive voice? Because we want to be strong writers. So we want to make sure we're using a strong voice. And strong writing uses an active voice. It's also more direct and concise. Remember our examples? It sounds more like what we use in everyday speech. And if we're using a passive voice, sometimes we get pretty wordy. We use a lot of words that aren't necessary. For example, an active voice is like watching the Steelers play football. A passive voice is like watching the popcorn on the floor of the stadium. Which would you rather do? I would rather watch a Steelers football game. I'm not interested in the popcorn on the floor. So we want to have strong writing, and that means we use a strong voice, which is generally the active voice. But does that mean we don't ever want to use a passive voice? No, there are times we want to use passive voice. Particularly if we're wanting to hide the subject of a sentence. Maybe if we're wanting to hide our meaning a little bit. For example, the mistake was made by somebody or someone. So we're kind of hiding the subject there. We're helping that person hide the blame. The mistake was made by someone. What if we try to intentionally minimize the guilt of the subject? Cheating on the test was committed by me. It says, if you were saying this sentence for yourself, I cheated on the test. That's not a good thing, is it? That's a guilty thing. So that's minimizing the guilt of the subject, which is me cheating on the test. So saying cheating on the test was committed by me kind of pushes the fact that I cheated on the test to the end of the sentence, and it minimizes the guilt of the subject. It does help sometimes to better emphasize the main point of the message. For example, children were harmed by the texting driver. In this example, passive voice is very important because it puts our focus on the children that were harmed and less focus on the actual texting driver. So it might tug at our emotional strings by making us first think of the children. So there are times to use passive voice. Go ahead and pause the video now and write down these examples of a time to use passive voice. Let's try to look at some ways to easily identify passive voice by the use of verbs. Look for linking verbs such as am, is, are, was, were, be, being, and been. These are called the to be forms of verbs. So if you catch sight of those, then you know that the verbs are usually going to help you identify a passive voice. I've got a trick for you. If you can add the words by zombies after the verb and it still makes sense, then hey, it's passive. So let's look at the example here. The wall was destroyed by the blazing fire. The wall was destroyed by the blazing fire by zombies, or the wall was destroyed by zombies. Yep, it's passive. Because I can take out by the blazing fire and add by zombies, and it's passive. What if I said the blazing fire destroyed the walls? Could I take out the walls and have the blazing fire destroyed by zombies? No, that's not passive. It doesn't even make sense. So if you can add by zombies after the verb and it still makes sense, then you've got a passive sentence. Kind of a fun way to determine if you're using passive voice or not. Go ahead and pause the video and write down this pretty neat little trick to find out if it's a passing voice. Let's look back at how this standard reads. Standard of Oklahoma Academic Standard 8.5.R.2 says, students will recognize the use of active and passive voice. So now that I've given you some definitions and ways to identify those, you can go to your assignments, practice these skills that are given to you by your teacher or by your parent, and then take an assessment to ensure mastery of that skill. Thank you for joining me today. Happy reading!